how did you first get into numerology?
Well, coming from a banking background, I guess in a sense it was a logical approach. I had 15 years as my career job in banking, and then went to have a family, left the bank, and after a few years I realised that I needed a hobby, something that was just for me. I suppose numerology was a logical extension, but as it turns out, I just had said to a friend this particular week, you always see astrology courses, but you never see numerology courses advertised. And of course, the very next week was a numerology course with Neil Hare down at Neutral Bay. And we've been together doing courses and discussion groups ever since.
When you say discussion groups, so the whole group has stayed together for 30 years?
We haven't been together that long. My interest in numerology was a personal interest once I left the bank.
Yeah.
But with him, I've probably joined since the late 90s, I think.
Okay.
And having my children grown up just a little bit. And so we've all been together, yes, primarily since the late 90s, this group. So we have discussion groups now, once we've all done our courses, we have these discussion groups on various topics of interest. And it might be like a coronation or the Olympic Games or...
Pertaining to the date that it happened?
An event, a person's life, like we studied the lives of fairly high-profile people, and also to try and, shall we say, put the numerology into practice of what we're learning. And it's what can we tell from the numbers that we have in front of us that relates to, say, a biography that we read in the paper, for instance, or an autobiography, or something about an event that's coming up, like an election coming up here in Australia now. What do we see in the numbers that relate to that and the various politicians, for instance?
And when did you first notice that the numbers you were seeing added up to events or things happening in your life?
Well, for a long time I'd noticed that I had coincidences or synchronicity happening. And initially I found that I kind of needed to be hit over the head with it, and I'd need to see something like 3 things in a row that had a message in some way for me. And it might be then I'd just say, oh, that's a coincidence, that's the 3rd one I've seen today. Like at one point I just found that I had 3 Mercedes cars parked around me, and I'm thinking, what on earth is this all about? So I started to see when these coincidences occurred, what was going on in me? Why was it that I needed to be reminded that way? What was it that was being reflected back to me by what I was seeing in that time, triple events of coincidence? But then after I got a bit more practiced, I did find that I was able to have 2 of a particular thing, and I got it after I saw 2.
So, Anne, what could that mean? 3 things of something happening at a time. What would you see in that?
Well, it was a reminder to me as a wake-up call. Look at what you're thinking, look at what you're feeling, look at what you're seeing. I've been called a natural channel, and I was getting things very randomly and didn't really realise that there was some sense of order that could be put to it. So all of my time of coincidences then led me to having a spiritual awakening in some form, and especially when my life got a little bit difficult and I needed to have some help. So I'd find that as I then eventually got into numerology and started to realise that there was a message that I could read. It's like this language of numbers. I was always hopeless with maths at school, but somehow the language of numerology really seemed to make some sense to me. And it brought some order and some reference point to my life. 2 o'clock in the morning, there's no one to run things by, so get out the pad, check on the numbers and see what's going on.
And by checking on those numbers, like you may see a situation or meet someone, when you check the numbers, are they always correct?
Oh, pretty close. Well, for me they are. And numerology is very much a personal reference point, I think. I really like doing personal numerology for people when I'm asked. I do have this, I suppose a psychological approach might be the way some people might regard it, I'm not sure, but it's like I like to know or be able to help people and use my own numerology for myself from the point of knowing the inner workings, knowing how people behave, what their motivation might be, what's the trigger point for them. Some people might not get numerology, other people devour it. So it's all very, very personal. So I do feel that what I get is for me. When I do it for other people, when I'm asked, and I'm just available in terms of my response. If I don't think I can help them, and I probably say, well, and which has happened from time to time, I'd suggest that maybe they need to get some professional counselling or something like that.
Previously, Anne, you've been doing stage work on stage with psychics and different people in this area. What have you found people have asked you more than anything when they find out you're a numerologist? What do they ask?
Well, probably I suppose my most successful has been to do with property and I'll say setting up a life situation. There was one lady, I'm just remembering quite out of nowhere here, random thought, so maybe it's relevant. She said, I'm looking at property in these 3 locations. Can you please tell me which one is going to best suit me to invest in right now? Now, that was right out of left field from my point of view, and I guess I remember it because it was a little outstanding. But I've had various ones since then. Now, I advised her that I did the numerology on her own personal numerology and the town or the cities that she was looking at. She actually had 3 cities in Australia, totally at different sides of the continent and different places in the continent. And apparently that was quite successful because she did come back 12 months later and say, okay, now I've got these choices, and we had a look at those, and apparently those were successful. So when it's like people looking at their life circumstances, is it a good idea to move? Or I'm thinking of moving somewhere, what do you think? When I first started, I was doing more relationship things, and apparently there's been a school of thought that thinks that when you start, you attract to you what you're only capable of doing. So young people's relationships was what I started off on. Then developing to more tricky life and death situations and the more meaningful things that people deal with when they have families and careers, like where are they going to live? Do I take this job opportunity? What does this bloke look like in terms of a single woman looking at relationship and making a choice on the future destination that she's going. So, and blokes too, more frequently, I might add, got some of the same sort of questions. So let's just say I have a practical approach in my own life, and I think I probably attract to me people who need practical answers.
With numerology, do you combine that with any psychic ability, or is it purely numbers and that's it?
I think I have as a fallback, I need to know the numbers. I need to know the practical application of the numbers. I need to know the interpretation. However, I've been told, and I do seem to go along with this advice that I've had, that I'm doing it intuitively. But I think part of that is that I've had a large exposure to many interpretations by well-known people, and I've probably absorbed a lot of that. So the intuitive part probably, shall we say, focuses on which will be the most relevant for the person I'm with at the time.
Okay. How many people would you have read for over the years?
I've lost track, I don't know.
And when they've finished with you, you've done a reading, right, the numbers and that, what do they take away?
Well, I'd hope they'd feel confident that they know the way forward. One lady's situation just coming to mind just out of nowhere too now, might be relevant here. I was sitting at a table in a country location, and this woman walked towards me to sit down opposite to have a reading, and as she was walking towards me, I saw her and I just intuited, and she was walking with a limp and she was walking with a stick. And I just intuited that she was just carrying a lot of guilt about something. When I looked at her numbers, I put something to her And she said, "How do you know that? I've never told anybody that situation about my life." And I suggested to her that she was carrying a lot of guilt and that maybe she needed to see a professional person, a counsellor perhaps, to help her through a 10-year secret that she'd held, that hadn't told a soul. Now, that was quite intuitive, but when she left, I think she had a sense of purpose of where she was going to now resolve and deal with that issue that had caused her some physical disablement, because it appeared to be, when we spoke about it, that it had a psychological basis. And I seriously now, just in retrospect, think that she could be walking around quite free of those sticks by now. Hope so anyway.
And if I pick up a book, Understanding Numerology, and it's 20 pages, am I qualified after that?
You'll have good groundwork. You do need to start with, what the number 1 means and number 2 and what the letter A and what the letter B mean, etc. Putting them all together, like I work in triplets, shall we say, like a 1 and a 2 gives me a 3. So I've got 3 digits I'm looking at. And when I'm looking at it, I would look at the placement of those in a person's life. There's the numerology that you get from a person's name, and there's the numerology you get from their date of birth. To do a full reading, you'd probably need an hour to go through it. If someone was reading a book for an hour, they'd probably get a bit of an idea, but it would take a lot of practice to put it together.
And for someone going to have maybe their first reading in the numbers, right? What should you expect from someone who is going to read this?
Quite a lot of readers use tarot cards as well. If you're doing straight numerology, then it's more of a technical approach. And I'd like to think that I'm a fairly technical type of reader from that point of view. They speak to me. I really like how I can get the interpretation and make it relevant to someone's life and that they agree with me. I'm not out to please anybody. If it doesn't work with them, then that's fine by me too. So I think being genuine and being authentic in who you would choose, an experienced reader, somebody who really knows their numbers, has been practicing for quite some time. Some people can find it very easy to do, like a personal year, for instance, and that's relevant. But if you're wanting a full overview just based on numbers, then somebody who's been doing it for quite a while and has got that credential behind them, I think.
Okay. And numbers mean different things, but do they mean different things for different people?
More different well, yeah, in a sense. Whatever you relate the numbers to is relevant. If you're relating it to a situation, an event happening at a particular time and place, then a certain interpretation would be relevant. If you're relating it to a person and something that's happening in their life, then it would have the appropriate significance in that way too.
Okay, and would your life be any different today if you hadn't started practicing in numerology?
I'd have probably been a bit more random, I think. When I get stuck, I go to numbers. I don't reference them every day. If I'm just going about my ordinary day and something trips me up or something impacts me in some way, I might suddenly say, "Oh, I wonder what the numbers are." And it's reassuring. I find numbers very reassuring for me, and I didn't have that before.
Thanks very much, Anne.
Pleasure.